Hello, I'm Bruce DePoy. Coming up today on News Talk, Hillary Clinton's marathon testimony before the House Benghazi Committee. 11 hours in the hot seat, answering questions about the death of 4 American diplomats. Getting favorable reviews, but is she out of the woods? Also, what will Congress be like if Wisconsin's Paul Ryan becomes Speaker? Congress faces numerous critical deadlines in the weeks that follow. And riding Metro, area members of Congress push legislation giving the federal government new oversight over the region's beleaguered transit agency.
From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DePoy.
Wow, it's been a great week. We're so glad to have you there. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We've got a great lineup on tap, so much we are grateful for your being here today. Coming up, by the way, in just a bit here on News Talk, Montgomery and Fairfax signed an agreement regarding the American Legion Bridge. You know how tedious life can be if your travels take you across that overtaxed span on a regular basis, particularly at rush hour, so stick around for our conversation with Montgomery County Councilman Roger Berliner. It's coming up in just a few moments here. But up first, Hillary on the hot seat. Former Secretary of State Clinton spending 11 hours answering questions from the House Select Committee on Benghazi. When it was over, Chairman Trey Gowdy was asked what the committee learned. He said, not much. Most observers said Clinton handled herself well. Eleanor Holmes Norton represents the District of Columbia in the U.S. House, and she joins us now. Welcome. It's great having you here.
Of course.
How much of the hearing did you see, and what did you make of it?
Well, you know, there was another hearing going on. We were trying to get out the surface transportation bill. Every moment I could take, I went into the cloakroom to watch this hearing, so I heard much of it. And I must say, if endurance and grace under pressure is what it takes to be President of the United States, you saw the next President of the United States doing very well yesterday. They were out to get her. They made no bones about that, and they just didn't. They didn't even focus on what you would think they would at this point focus on. 4 men are dead. You got to find out what happened. What do the emails of Sidney Blumenthal have to do with that? They weren't able to make the connection, but I would venture that probably 60 minutes, one way or the other, was devoted to that. As many members came in on that and Democrats had to respond. Most such committees that look seriously at important events are bipartisan. Never have any gone on this long.
But critics will say it's the Democrats' fault that this isn't a more critics will say it's the Democrats' fault that the two parties aren't working in lockstep on this one.
Well, Democrats aren't in charge. Who set this committee up? McCarthy told you. Our majority leader told you who set it up and told you why. Another Republican member has said, yeah, it really is set up in order to make her numbers go down. It's not. That's a Republican member talking. And what are Democrats supposed to do? If there have been, if she's already been before the House and Senate, if there are no open questions, if this is a tragedy, why do you want to milk it more? This majority has decided that if your committees don't polarize the country enough, then set up a select committee. That's what they've done with Planned Parenthood, and that's what they did with Benghazi, except Benghazi is too serious for that. And I think we know what happened. I think mistakes were made, and I think what we ought to be doing is making sure that there is enough money to protect our consulates and our embassies around the world, because they're all in big trouble.
And that's on Congress.
That's on Congress. That's on the sequester. That's on the cuts. And that was very little discussed in that hearing.
Glenn Thrush of Politico and others have observed that there are still processes underway that are looking at former Secretary of State Clinton's use of a private email account and a homebrew server, and that she's now deciding, in essence, how much of the public record gets back into the hands of the government itself.
You mean how much of her private emails get back into the hands of the government?
Yeah. So, is there a concern? Do you have a concern that events could still unspool in a way that is unfavorable to her down the road?
I can tell you this much: they intend to keep this going throughout the campaign.
But to the extent that the Obama Justice Department and the FBI are still looking at all of the things that have been unearthed?
Well, if no, not the ones that have been unearthed, but if you have to take all of the emails, go back over them again, and read them line by line, and then put them out as you get them, then what you've done is you've created a scenario to have these things come out throughout the campaign. It looks like the American people have caught on. Her favorables have gone up. It looks like people are tired of this. And of course, my own view is that Republicans and Democrats want a concentration on something else. Everybody's doing worse in this country than they were before. There's something about the economy that affects Democrats and Republicans that is not being discussed. That's what Bernie Sanders is. That's why he is beginning to capture so many Democrats. Republicans don't talk about it that way, but they have the same issue. David
Gergen, a high-level former Washington advisor to multiple presidents of both parties, although I think more Republican than Democratic. He's now at Harvard, highly regarded. Last night on CNN, he said that what former Secretary of State Clinton endured yesterday was unprecedented. He called it badgering, and he said he hopes we never see anything like that again. Are you in agreement with David Gergen?
I am. I heard him, and I thought it was very compelling because he'd served on both sides, and because he has a sense of the history of these kinds of hearings. And here you had screaming, you had badgering, you had Democrats trying to defend Republicans screaming at each other. Nobody can come out of that with the sense that the truth is going to come out. They just see another scenario of Democrats fighting Republicans and Republicans fighting Democrats.
Was the tone off? Did they err in that score?
I think this much in this way. Given that the committee had been discredited before it began, I would have taken another approach, a light approach on questioning her to get back my credibility as a committee. That's what I thought they were going to do. Actually, I know and like Trey Gowdy. I think he feels mortally wounded because in committee, he and I serve on the Government and Reform Committee. He has been very prosecutorial, but I have found him to be very fair. When he saw that the legs had been cut from under him by McCarthy and by other Republicans, he felt that his own reputation was at issue, and then he doubled down. So I think he's put in an untenable position. The Democrats are thinking about whether they should continue on a committee that has been discredited. And the people are on both sides on the committee. Some feel if we walk away, we'll leave them by themselves, talking to themselves, especially since most of this is going on behind closed doors. Others feel that then they may come public with more of their information. There'll be nobody to defend the Democrats. So that conversation is going on. Should you give this committee continued credibility by serving on it?
It appears Paul Ryan will be the new Speaker of the House. To what extent, comment on, to the extent that you know him, which is probably fairly well, I'd be curious to get your thoughts. But to the extent that there are big issues coming and deadlines looming, for example, on the debt cap, is it possible that we'll see, perhaps under John Boehner, and if not, then under Paul Ryan, a scenario where the debt cap is lifted and we avoid any a shock to the nation's economic system, because we'll have a majority of the minority, which is to say your party, siding with enough Republicans to put it over the top to avert a crisis?
Let me give you my best guess is what I think happened. I know Paul Ryan. He was a follower of Jack Kemp. I love Jack Kemp. He's a Republican. On the other side, on debt and other things like that, know how to work with Democrats. Paul Ryan is very conservative, but just did a deal with Patty Murray. That is one of the first deals, perhaps the only deal that was been done. Kept us from closing down, did the debt ceiling. This is what I think is happening. I think that this speaker, John Boehner, is going to do those tough things before he leaves.
He's going to clear the bond.
I think that's the deal that he will do. He will get the majority of however we can get it on things like debt and on keeping the government open. Then I think the deal with with Paul Ryan is then he can take over. Now, Paul Ryan is risking everything. If you have a good reputation, the best way to spoil it is to jump into this mess. He still didn't get the endorsement of the so-called Freedom Caucus because you need 80% to get the endorsement. But they're going to let it happen. They have not pledged to follow him. And the moment he decides to make a deal with the Democrats, and the deal will always be for something critical because he's so conservative, he certainly won't make a deal. For example, he had to promise not to make a deal on immigration. What is that going to do for the next presidential contest with Hispanics having heard that? One thing I don't want, one promise I want you to make is no deal on immigration reform. He said yes. So here we have a very good man, very conservative, who I think for the sake of his own caucus decided he had to do it very reluctantly. And look what he had.
And not to be naive, maybe for the nation. I mean, it's not every day that people are, from Mitt Romney to who knows how much pressure has come. But people are saying, I think the nation needs you right now. I mean, the House,
in order to work.
His party has significant control of the House, and we only have but 2 houses.
And if anything's going to get done, you're the man that can make it get done. But look at the other deal he made. I've never heard of this. This man has young children, teenage children. He says, I got to get home to my children. I'm not going to spend 200 days on the road the way John Boehner did, so somebody else is going to have to do that. Who makes the money is the Speaker. They had to agree to that. They are desperate. They have a party and a caucus in shambles. They are trying to pick themselves up before the 2016 election.
You're working with your colleagues from around the region on Metro. The federal government is about to have new oversight over our local transit system.
And let me say, we are very much unlike what's happening in the Congress. Barbara Comstock, for example, from Virginia, worked with me. Donna Edwards. I'm the ranking member of the committee with jurisdiction over Metro. And an emergency recommendation came out that we should have federal takeover. Now, understand that this is not very unusual in the bill that we passed only recently, only about 4 years ago, because there was no federal oversight of Metro Rail, but there's always been federal oversight of rail and of air travel and the rest of it. And so the compromise was you let the locals try first, but the Federal Transit Administration is always there to help or to take over. We are the only system that goes through 3 states. We've had the National Transportation Safety Board say, look, this is pretty close to an emergency. We need, particularly since no local jurisdiction as yet hasn't had the time to set up their own safety oversight because nobody's ever done it before. The only people who've ever done it before are the feds. Come in and help Metro. I have put in a bill. I asked Donna Edwards and Representative Comstock to co-sponsor with me because I wanted the entire region, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. on it.
Both parties?
At both parties, they said, absolutely, Eleanor, we're on there together. I asked the FTA, since you could do it administratively, get your people on the ground now. They have done that. I hope that makes the riders of Metro feel safer, and I hope more of them will continue to ride Metro because we are losing riders, I think, in part because people were beginning to feel unsafe.
The more people who use Metro, the more we get relief from our congestion situation. We'll be talking in our next segment about road congestion. So you couple that with the revenue. I mean, Metro is deemed less reliable, therefore fewer people are using it, therefore less money in the fare box, therefore an inferior system that brings about that spiral.
Vicious cycle could tear us apart, and we're the second largest metro in the country.
Talk briefly, if you would. I know that your constituents have spoken to you about the issue of airport noise, and I know you've attempted to take steps to deal with that. Can you tell us briefly?
I was on a one-woman show to try to get rid of air noise over Ward 3. But then I look for allies, and I find that this noise is affecting jurisdictions all over the country. Arizona has sued the federal transit, the FDA because of it. So I've asked for a hearing so we have allies over what has become this so-called next generation, where they make planes different, faster, is causing greater noise. Maryland, Virginia, D.C., they've got to fix it. And I'm looking for allies. I think I'm finding them, and what we need is a hearing so that Ward 3 is not out there with only me shouting, deal with our noise, so that we have the kind of allies, Republican and Democrat, that we need to get real federal remedies for this airline noise.
I wasn't aware that the improved technology, which we all love, which had this other component.
Precisely.
Eleanor Holmes Norton, Democrat from the district. Great having you here. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
You too.
We appreciate your time. When we return, taking steps to ease the bottleneck at the American Legion Bridge.